On the podcast today, we're going to speak about the Buddhi, the universal intelligence, this idea that is found in the East, particularly in Hinduism and Buddhism. And there's other traditions in Asia where you find this idea. And for those unfamiliar with Buddhi, Buddhi comes from the Sanskrit root word Bud, which means to be awake, to be aware, or in the Buddha's case, the awakened one. The Buddha, that as a title, came from Bud. But Buddhi is a different term. It's a Vedic term, actually. But we find Buddhi in Buddhism as well, obviously. Bud, right? And a lot of people underappreciate this aspect of Eastern spirituality, particularly, because a lot of people just focus on bhakti elements and spirituality, devotional elements, without coming into contact with the Buddhi. So, as I said, the Buddhi is this universal intelligence. It's like this organ we have. Is it like an organ of consciousness? It's like an organ within consciousness. And so you can relate that to also like an intellectual faculty, like, a heightened intellectual faculty, not just ordinary intellect. And so, the Buddhi is this power to form concepts and to understand reality and so forth and so on. And so, in saying that, Buddhi is this thing that will ultimately expands your understanding of reality and allows you to cut through falsehood to truth, right? It's this almost like a discerning faculty that you have, which is very similar to, again, ideas of intellect. And so you and I often talk about Buddhi a lot because a lot of people underappreciate it. A lot of people don't cultivate intelligence or don't harness this organ of consciousness. We might harness our bicep and get stronger biceps, but we won't, exercise the Buddhi, which allows you to see reality in a truer context and to understand things at a deeper level. A lot of people can get overwhelmed and also feel threatened at the intelligence of some people in the world, right? Because those people have been constantly, cultivating they may not know this, but cultivating their Buddhi, which allows them to bring insights to others and enlightens the world, So.
Yeah, when you mention like bicep, it's the same thing. Like when we want to have a healthy looking body to try to stay fit and all that, you need to put in the right fuel and you need to give a regular exercise. Then you get your body stronger and more like slimmer, whatever. Just like our intelligence, it's just the same, isn't it? Like if we don't exercise that, like you said, that organ, it won't be expanding, right? Yeah. So they're just like giving exercise to the physical body. And especially like nowadays, people don't seem to value intelligence as much. So people like to just to create something fun content for people on social media, and which is like more clickbaity and more like an impulsive kind of attraction from people. So we don't value intelligence in general much anymore. So we don't make it as a good import. It's important that to cultivate our intelligence.
Well, it's because when we talk about muscles, right, and we talk about the body, you either use it or lose it, right? So as you get older, things become dormant in your body. Muscles become, they become dormant and die away, and so it's like a use it or lose it sort of thing. Where, as you said, it's the same with the Buddhi, same with the universal intelligence. It's either you use it or you don't lose it, but like it gets suppressed and like it gets like this calcification of nonsense that develops around it, which becomes conditioning, belief systems, and just general like inertia and passivity and like people who are just watching Netflix all the time and their mind is just kind of dormant and not active, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, in like a weight training exercise, we say activating your muscles, right?
Yeah.
Like certain part of the muscle, because we don't use it in daily life, in our lifestyle. So that if we don't activate through exercising to isolate that muscle, then it'll slowly lose its strength, and also you won't be able to activate that muscle from giving the signal from your brain, right?
Yes.
I think the same way, like even in the intelligence is the same. If you don't keep activating your intelligence, again, it won't be completely impossible to reactivate it later on, but it'll get harder and harder, right?
Yes.
Just like the same when we get a bit obese, if we don't put the work in, it'll get bigger and bigger. And so at the end of the day, whenever you want to actually put work in, it'll be much more difficult.
100%. And you raise a point about like we were going to talk about it a little bit later, but we'll address it now, like how we don't value the buddhi or the intelligence. It's having intelligence, right? So we've designed a world that values material acquisition, status, wealth, and in general, let's not beat around the bush, more than 99% of people in the world spend a lot of their time in trying to accumulate wealth, taking care of just the general survival elements of existence, right? So food, clothing, and shelter. But we do that to its nth degree, like where we want Lamborghinis and 10-bedroom houses and all sorts of nonsense like that. But all of our energy is going into those materialistic needs, and none of the energy is going into the buddhi. It's going into intelligence itself, the universal intelligence. And so when we do see, like when you see a person with a really high intelligence, and like if you look at someone like Aldous Huxley, or in the modern day, a lot of if you look at Jordan Peterson or someone like this, they've invested a lot of time in intelligence itself, like you said, if you exercise it, right? And so they've done the work. So instead of going out there, of course they had to acquire a living and so forth and so on, and have been fortunate in some sense to make a living off of being, Aldous Huxley wrote 100 books and what have you. Not that he would have made lots of money from that, but in exercising that, things came to them, like financial things and stuff like that. But the point is that if you don't exercise, I mean, they spent the time actually investing in the intelligence itself, right? And so, and we all have that opportunity. That's all of being a human. You have buddhi. Dog doesn't have buddhi. Ant doesn't have buddhi. We have buddhi. And so we're not investing any time into that, because we're investing time into, I want to get a promotion at my job. I want to get my kids into a private school, and then your mind gets sidetracked, and then next minute, like we were saying, 20 years is gone, and though you still have the buddhi in you, accessing that and activating that is almost impossible, because it's like the pineal gland, right? When the pineal gland gets a calcification over time over the pineal gland and blocks people from experiencing, mystical dimensions. And
Yes. Because our intelligence, that part of our intelligence, become dormant. We just exercising one part of our brain, so to say, like you say, just accumulating material possessions and financial freedom and whatnot. Of course, that is possible because we have intelligence. But the problem is we are giving so much energy just to that one aspect of our possibilities, right? Yeah. But again, I think our bigger potential and bigger possibilities are coming from exercising the other part of our intelligence, because that, again, like same as we're reactivating a subconscious mind, right? And from there, you can reveal a lot of secrets in life. So that's something we need to really put an effort.
Yeah.
And again, if we keep that dormant for too long, it'll be too difficult to delve into in depth in your mind, I think. And it's just like changing long-time habit in your life, right? Like, because I think, like, let's say, reading, for example, reading books is one best way to cultivate your intelligence. And if reading isn't part of your habit, isn't part of your lifestyle, you gotta make it a habit of, and longer you put it off, harder it's gonna take you to have that habit, right? And again, because of there's lots of technological devices nowadays and lots of social media platforms, we are so used to watching things. Watching is only stimulating from hearing and the visuals, right? And that is just very momentary. You will, I mean, even if it's educational content, you will get a lot out of it, but it's passive activity. Watching something is passive activity. Of course, it's important. Sometimes we want to have a downtime and just want to relax, right? But we definitely have to put an effort and allocate some time on reading, because again, you know best, reading is it's active activity. Yeah. So while you're reading, your imagination gets like much further, and your curiosity become much bigger, right? Yeah. So, and it gives yourself time to formulate your own ideas from reading lots of books.
Yeah, reading is very important, and it's interesting that the world that we've designed, especially through social media, through YouTube and everything like that, we're really going down this path of becoming watchers and listeners, you know, like especially with audio and everything like that. And we're turning away from the engagement of reading books, you know. And a lot of people go, yeah, but I love audio books and this and that. And look, that's all well and good, but there's something about the act of reading, as you're alluding to, where the Buddhi is an active engagement with knowledge, and then that expands its view, as opposed to audiobooks is somewhat, you can flake off, right? Like you're walking off for a walk and see a cute dog walk past, you got the audiobooks, but you missed a paragraph.
That's right. You completely didn't hear it.
Yeah, you were drifting off with whatever, you maybe with your mind, or, you know, as you know, when you read a book, if you do drift off with your mind and you're reading, you go, wait, what was... I read that whole paragraph and I wasn't even paying attention.
So you're aware of that,
you're aware
right?
of it, yeah.
Whereas if you're listening or watching something, you can fleeting off to think something else, but then like, oh, go back to this, and you don't know what you have missed out.
Yeah. You're not really up to speed. There is a thing in, you know, the studies with this, that actually reading books is a way of, well, one of the best ways to cultivate intelligence. And as we know, most people who have let's say a heightened Buddhi, or a very exercised Buddhi, universal intelligence, are readers, right? Like a lot of the highly intelligent people who have lived in the world, in the spiritual sphere, have been well read, haven't they? It's like, so, you know, you look at all of them, right? And you can tell who is well read, right? And there are many, and there are gurus out there who say that they don't read books, but you know that they do read books privately because of the way they speak. I won't mention one in particular, but he's very famous, and his name starts with S. You go figure that one out. But you know, you can tell a person who is well read because they're articulate. They have an ability to expand your worldview, and this is what the Buddhi is meant for, right? Aldous Huxley, writing The Perennial Philosophy, just expanded everyone's worldview in the 30s. They went from 0 to 1 million in one hit. They were like, what is this? You know, like, even The Perennial Philosophy now, people aren't ready to read. First of all, because he's got an IQ upward of 200, and you got to be pretty onto it to read that sort of book.
Even lots of vocabularies that he uses in the
you would
book
never use.
Is like you have no idea what that means, and you'll have to have
dictionary
a dictionary out. Although you'll be a native English speaker, you have no idea.
Those words haven't been used for hundreds of years.
What about this? Like one sentence is going half of the page.
Yeah.
One sentence is the whole entire paragraph.
Yeah.
Like, so that is to show his chain of thought was really at length, and every single word and thoughts were in order as well, well organized.
As you remember, when I first started getting published, because I grew up on Huxley and all of these great scholars, so I was writing lengthy sentences, and then when I went to my first publishers, like, they're like, mate, you got to like start to chop these down, like you gotta separate these chains of thought. And I thought, like, what, like, because it's all kind of goes together, but thank God for editors, right? So, but like that's kind of, you know, alludes to like where the world is now, right? We're in sort of like this categorized sound bite evolution of the mind, where that's the thought, that's the thought, that's the thought, and they're all separate. But as you mentioned with Huxley, like, he'll have one paragraph sentence, and though you may think that the start of this sentence is going to be completely disconnected from the end, it's not. It all goes together in a wacky way, but that's actually a better way to explain that thought form of what Aldous had for people. And only a genius like him can really pull that off, where most of us we wouldn't be able to. But that is, you know, that's what the Buddhi is, because we're not focusing on intelligence anymore, it's becoming background noise. And so we're focusing on those energies of materialism and, you know, acquiring all of this stuff. And so then the Buddhi becomes dormant. But if we can, like you said, get back to books and read books that challenge you too. Don't just read like wishy-washy spiritual books, like,
Or just storybooks, like novels.
No, don't read novels. Yeah. No. Don't read any of that. You got to read a book that's going to expand your view. That's what the Buddhi is about. Just like, you know, fertilizer is good for plants, or like some sort of mulch is good for plants. Reading is and challenging books are mulch for the Buddhi. Like, it allows the Buddhi to expand and grow its worldview, and that's why the people who focus on intelligence expand our worldview, and that's what it's all about. And that's, you know, and we've experienced this personally, right? Like, you read a lot of books that challenge you, so to speak, but usually you're drawn to certain books, right, that are gonna expand your view, and then there are certain things that are so simple sometimes to explain, but are just outside our view. But the way that someone explains it, who has, you know, an exercised Buddhi, can explain it in a way, and you're like, how did I not see that? You know, like, I remember reading books when I was younger, and I even remember back reading the Course in Miracles, and when I was young, and then when I was reading that, and it said, how can you, it said something along the lines of this, like, how can you want world peace if you're not a peaceful person? So if you want world peace, shouldn't you be a peaceful person? And at that time when I was young, it was like, wow, like, they'd never thought about it that way, because, you know, I was around a bunch of dummies, and and, you know, like, so you didn't think about it, and that sort of knowledge, like, if, for example, if you said something like that in America at the current moment, that may be mind-blowing for people, because people are pretending like they want peace in society and this and that, but everyone's separate and everyone's fighting, and it's very immature. So this is where the Buddhi helps, right? The Buddhi allows you to reveal even real simple things like that, to open up a new vista of knowledge and awareness for people.
Yeah, that's the great thing about reading books and cultivating intelligence. I find it often the real important bullet points or chunk of knowledge is so close to us. It's so near you, but it's just like what you were saying before, it's blind spot. But without cultivating the knowledge, like, you will miss it, right? So that from cultivating knowledge, that you get to know these things, right? Those blind spots on the light now, right? Yeah. And those, I think, those are little things that they're revealing little knowledge that's so close to us. It changes a lot of things, because that obviously we were all once upon a time like rebel and protest against everything, and like
it's an age thing, right?
Yes, and we fight against whoever, and we yell out the world peace and this and that, and that is to when we look only outside, right? We look outside where the world there is no peace, right? So that we want world peace, so we like yell out to people to join the group or whatever. But again, peace is not out there. It's
inside.
Within every single individual. Again, that is to turn the direction the other way around, and so it makes it much more like insightful and makes you to think where to look really, right? And this actually it's a big change on the perspective in a individual level, and so that is very important.
Yeah, well, that's why Lao Tzu criticized Confucius for being a moral hypocrite, because as we know, a lot of people who are so attracted to morality are hypocritical because they don't, follow what they preach. And their actions are aggressive and violent. They're not peaceful. And so that's where hypocrisy is born. And so that's always been with us, one of the big problems. And that's where you need to cultivate intelligence. If you're not, you're going to fall down that path of becoming a moral hypocrite. Yeah. And when we think about the Buddhi, you've got to think about it in the sense of like a torch, right? Like if you look at the dark and you have a small torch, so you're shining the torch in the dark, and you can see some things. As you exercise the Buddhi, the scope of the torch gets bigger, 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 and in the darkness, this is like a metaphor for your awareness. You become more aware of the subtlety of life and the things that a general person can't access, right? And that's why a lot of great scholars and spiritual teachers and that have been able to enlighten the world, because they've exercised that Buddhi, which starts to then sense the subtlety in the world. The problem is that when some of these people explain this to the general population, they get condemned or killed, and like you see in the modern day, right? You got people, scholars and that, who are explaining things to people that, especially to like people who are obsessed with woke ideology and that, where people are explaining common sense. Scholars and that, and enlightening them, but then you see a big pushback where you have like the birth of cancel culture and all this nonsense, which we don't need to talk about, that everyone's familiar with these days. But that's part of it, see? You have someone who has a very exercised Buddhi, a very expansive Buddhi, who is enlightening people with a Buddhi the size of a pea. And they haven't exercised it because their mind is riddled with social justice, with moralism, but they themselves are hypocritical because they don't follow what they preach. And the way that you can say that, the way that you can always nut down that they don't follow what they preach is because of how aggressive their viewpoints are and how biased their viewpoints are. They're not objective, right? And so that's one of the big things. Like objectivity, especially in Eastern spirituality, is a big thing, having objectivity, because it's the subject that causes all the trouble in the world, the subjective viewpoint. Right. And so what the Buddhi does is it kind of expands your awareness to be more objective. And it's like my analogy in science and practice of humility between the warrior and the sage, where the warrior's mind is caught in all of the dramas and the details of life, while the sage is up on the mountain and can see, this is metaphorically speaking, he can see the world is in beautiful harmony and order.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say about the view of a sage and a warrior. Mm-hmm. And again, that's the same thing that goes with the analogy you said with the torch, right? Mm-hmm. Like warrior will be able to see just with the small torch. Yeah. But in the sage's perspective, it's much larger, right? And that all the lights are upon the world, and they sense the subtlety of the movement of the world, and so that they have much bigger and more like a elevated perspective, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So from that perspective, nothing is absolute, and it's hard to judge what's right or what's not right, and things like that. And again, from having that perspective, it gives us much larger understanding about the world and ourselves, and also life in general.
Definitely. So on the spiritual path, especially if we follow the Eastern spiritual traditions, we're not so invested in financial freedom, but freedom itself, right? And so this is the opposite way of thinking to the status quo, because we're trying to cultivate that buddhi. And so that's what essentially, in some sense, leads you to freedom, because you're expanding your consciousness, you're becoming aware of the subtlety of reality down to its most subtle form, where the Atman merges with Brahman, or the Atman is recognized as Brahman. So your energy has moved away from samsara. So there's nothing wrong with financial freedom, right? So everyone deserves financial freedom, because first of all, like as a human, everyone's right is to have food, clothing, and shelter. That's just the general what we need, right? And then all love and everything obviously is always there. So, but it's a turning away from that and a moving towards these highest spiritual faculty, what that we would call buddhi. So we turn our attention away to freedom itself. And so when we look at the Vedic traditions and we look at Buddhism, especially if we go back 2,500 years ago and older, if we look at the Vedic tradition, then there was a big emphasis on exercising the buddhi. So you would study scripture all the time. You had to get your mind into that place that you actually understood what the Vedas were saying, what the Upanishads were saying, even what the Puranas were trying to explain through stories, the Nikayas with Buddhism. You had to get your mind in that place, and you had to focus on that knowledge, right? And so, but we're not doing that these days, because we're in sound bites and we don't have time. Well, we say we don't have time, and most of our time is accumulated with Netflix and YouTube and what have you. So back in those older traditions, the reason why they came to a lot of deep spiritual realizations is because they were exercising the buddhi, as opposed to us. A lot of people say, "Oh, how come these ancients had like a much more like on-point view of reality than we do today?" And it's because our mind is so fragmented now. It's chopped up into little pieces and flipped around like a pancake, and then we're expected to make sense of this reality we live in. And that's where the buddhi comes in, because when you start to exercise that, you start to make sense of the reality you're in, and you start to blast away all of this hypnosis that you've accumulated. And so you start then to discern between truth and falsehood, right? Which is one of the main things of the intelligence.
Yeah.
And actually exercising that buddhi, that's when you bring the realizations, I mean, we were talking privately about this the other day. We were talking about Joseph Henrich specifically, like his work in anthropology, about how groundbreaking it is, and about, he may not know this and he may not believe this because I'm sure he's an atheist, but his buddhi is on fire, you know what I mean? Like, because he's bringing realizations to the field of anthropology that are interesting for anyone. It doesn't matter what field you're from. Unless you're a real fundamentalist, religious person, you're not going to be interested in that. But most people in general would be interested, because the realizations he is bringing comes from someone who has cultivated the intelligence, who understands things at a deeper level, and is putting the torch on things that we couldn't see in the dark. Yeah. But it's enlightening our mind, right? And that's what was happening back in the day. But we've gone away from that. Yeah. We've gone away from that. So.
Yeah, I think in the old days, obviously, when the pre-electricity age, there's nothing but written information, right? So entertainment was reading, I think, back then. So, people would share a similar knowledge amongst a certain group of people, and to talk about it, they gather at around their someone's place or something and have a meal or have a cup of tea, and not to purposefully sit down and talk about it. I think it's just like as a casual conversation, it'll just come up. The topic will come up, and they'll share their ideas and thoughts, and and that helps to expand your mind as well. And these things were happening very organically, I believe. And that is a very similar experience that I had when I was staying in a monastery in northern Thailand. And every day, let's say like 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that, it's 3 to 5 roughly, just give it enough hours for the people who are there to practice the meditation, come around, and monastery offers teas, like there's an Ovaltine, there's a black tea, or some soy milk that's been offered from neighborhood, from lay people and things like that. So you share a nice drink, and just not necessarily about meditation, just anything. You could talk about anything. It wouldn't be chit-chat, but like, for example, I remember there was once this Iranian male person was practicing meditation at a monastery for like 10 days or something, and he shared his ideas how meditation takes on place like Iran, and his knowledge on lucid dream, and he wanted to just inquire his question to the monk what he thinks about these things that he thinking about, and this and that. And so it's like there's like a satsang kind of thing, but it's much more interactive and more like a discourse on any knowledge in general. So that having that kind of time is also very important to expand your mind, and also again stimulate your curiosity in general, right? And I see nowadays this main topic of conversation is of course politics, and I think exactly. I think the reason why people like to talk about politics is somewhat entertaining, I think.
Yeah, they love drama.
Yes.
Their mind is caught in drama.
That's exactly it. They like to see the conflicts, and
they don't want peace. They don't want peace.
They just take side in what they think is right. And
did you say something? I just nodded off. I don't know what you said.
Yeah. So it lacks depth, obviously. It's not insightful. They're just stating what media was telling you. Yeah. Right?
And it's even true. Like when you look at the media, like it's all bloody fake news, isn't it?
Yeah. Fake news.
Well, it is, right? It's either biased. Like it's biased. I mean, the media has gone far away from being objective.
Yes.
You know, because...
Oh, yeah. They all have...
Especially in America. I mean, other places are different, obviously, around the world, and I'm only speaking, but other countries, Western countries especially, are like the States, where they'll have a biased opinion. And
yeah, definitely. Like the same as here in Australia.
Yeah.
I don't know why Australian people are so attracted to American politics. I don't know why.
Americans aren't attracted to Australian politics.
Yeah, they're so so obsessed to give a thought, and they feel it's important to have an agenda or something to prove a point. So that nowadays the conversation is far from having a knowledge-based discourse.
Yeah, of
it's
course.
all like soundbite kind of thing, and just whatever they saw on the post on Facebook or something become a topic of conversation without really knowing what that is about and things like that. So there is definitely the lack of depth and a level of understanding there. And again, like back in those days, there's far less distractions. That's why I think inevitably our ancestors had much higher intellectual level of seeing things.
Yeah, like you said, pre-electricity, right? Pre-noise and pre-internet, and like what you mentioned about when you're at that particular monastery. Shout out to Tamwa Monastery. That's like a satsang, right? And satsang was always important in all the great traditions, where you sat down with the one who had the knowledge and you discussed. right? And so when we go back further and further and further back in the traditions, when we were in much smaller communities, even when we go back to the early Vedic periods, there were the people out in the field and farming, and there were people doing things in that small society there were. But then there was always the guru, right? The guru who was dedicated to the knowledge, and then at night they would all get around, and it might only be like, let's say 5 people in the community, you know what I mean? But there's the guru. And then they would discuss the great knowledge and, discuss all of the inquiries we have about life, right? Death, the nature of the existence. These questions don't ever go away. And so the Eastern spiritual traditions are the ones you go to for answers in these, right? And so, like it's like there's one particular story, like in Badrinath up in northern India, there's a guru who lives up on the mountain above Badrinath, and a lot of people, he stays in solitude all the time, this guy, right? And so a lot of people only go up there to see him once or twice a year, and then a lot of people who go up there have the same questions, like how to deal with depression and blah 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 and this and that. But his answers are pretty can be brutal, because he'll say, that's all Maya. You're trying to get me to talk about Maya. Depression is the result of having a mind entangled with materialism and entangled with jiva. I know that that's all an illusion. So you want me to talk about what's not real, or you want me to talk about what's real? And so a lot of people go away somewhat empty-handed, but he gives them the knowledge that they actually need. And we spoke about this actually a few weeks ago about in the mental health podcast about bringing dissolving that personality, so to speak, and loosening the grip on that to come to a deeper realization. And that's where the Buddhi helps. And see that specific guru, he has a very heightened Buddhi from being up in solitude, studying the scriptures, meditation all the time. His life is fully invested in Buddhi. Yeah. He's not invested in materialism. He has a little hut up there that the devotees built him, and he shanti, shanti, shanti. And the place he lives is very beautiful, immaculate. I mean, the surroundings on top of the mountain. And so, but because he has dedicated his life to that, he can give the right answers to the people inquiring. And though a lot of people out there may disagree with what he had said about depression, but that's the actual real dope, whether you want to believe it or not.
Maybe that individual wasn't quite ready to hear.
No, maybe not.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of coming together in satsang, where you can come together and explore deep knowledge. Satsang means to sit in truth, right? Or to sit and speak in truth. And so that's been a core part of all of the Eastern traditions, no matter whether Hinduism, Buddhism, or Taoism. Even within the Zen tradition in Japan, right? Tea ceremony is a big thing. What do we do? Just sit there and drink tea? People think this about tea ceremony, so we're just going to sit and drink tea. And it's like, yeah, of course you sit and drink tea. It's like tea ceremony. But the whole idea of tea ceremony is to talk about the deeper philosophical ideas of Zen in a very calm, Zen manner. Yeah. And so those aspects of Eastern traditions have always been there. And we're going away from that because we're becoming increasingly individual, and we're not connected more with each other in general life, right? Like we're all wearing our ear things, we're disconnected from each other, spatial awareness is in the toilet, and so we're diminishing that. And so, you and I are, what's old is new again for you and I, you know what I mean? Or even what's ancient is new again for you and I. So, and I'm guessing most people who listen and watch the podcast, it would be the same for them as well. So, we have to really put that value back on the intelligence. So, we have to turn our back, turn away from samsara, turn away from like Okay, it's all what you. Okay, yeah. Of course, you need clothes, you need your income, and this and that. But you need to. Do you need to invest every minute of the day in that? You know, or are you going to invest in meditation, reading?
Reading.
First of all, meditation and reading go hand in hand, as we know. Look, the ancients have known this forever, but recent studies and that suggest that, you know, and Watts would talk about this all the time, that meditation actually enhances your intellect, actually enriches it, because in that sense he's talking about the Buddhi. It enhances the Buddhi, because the Buddhi becomes like full power. It can grasp things a lot easier because it's not riddled with other, like you mentioned before, subconscious content that messes with the ability to understand things.
Yeah, meditation helps, I think, activating the sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic. Yeah. Parasympathetic nervous system. So that means to have a complete rest for the mind, for the brain. So our focal point is at whether that's your body's bodily sensation or a breath or whatever. Then once you focus on something simple that gets you keep the concentration going as far as you could, then your brain kind of rests, like just that wavelength that's up here is subside, and then come to the complete calmness. And you are still awake. You're not sleeping. You are still awake. But from focusing on one thing, your mind gets to relax. And again, from concentrate on one simple thing, that helps you to concentrate longer and better.
Yep.
So that obviously it'll help you to read something with a good concentration level, right?
100%. 100%. And it allows you to absorb the knowledge better and understand it better and everything, you know, like, as most people watching and listening know, that you and I, that's basically our life, right? You and I have lived a lot of our life in somewhat isolation and study and going to the great places and visiting and staying, and obviously meditation is a big part of that. And it all goes hand in hand. I mean, it depends on what you value. If you value a big car and big house, then go for it. There's no right or wrong, but you won't have the intelligence. That's something that you can't buy. You can buy a Lamborghini. You can buy it. You can even go out and get a loan if you want, and you can get one. But you can't harness the Buddhi.
Yes.
That requires a little bit of work. Not a little bit of work. It requires a lot of work. It requires a dedication to the spiritual path to harness that. And so, you know, a lot of people, they say they want to be intelligent. They want this and that. But then when you actually lay it out for them, that this is what is required to exercise the Buddhi, to expand it, and to come to a deeper realization. Oh, no. That's gonna eat into my Netflix time. You know what I mean? I can't have that. Like,
The world had become too solid, meaning there's no subtlety in our sensations anymore. Like, I remember, I mean, like that when you mentioned the tea ceremony in Zen Buddhism, and again, like as we have experienced in the past, when you sit with someone who are wiser than you, there's a certain level, certain presence about those individuals, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I actually love being around people like that and feel their presence. Often they're so calm, very kind, very loving people, and at the same time they're very intelligent and wise, and that subtle presence of a certain individual, it can give you so much insight without any words, right? Just to feel, from the feeling that, right? Yeah. But nowadays, everything is so concrete and very stimulating, so that we almost lost the faculty of feeling the subtle sensations, I think.
Yep.
And obviously to get that back, a daily meditation practice will definitely help. Yeah, but I'm saying that it's important to have that subtle sensations of an individual, and you just kind of feeling it out, that sort of thing. But now again, nowadays when you're with someone like clumsy and flimsy and like
careless,
very fidgeting as well, like they're so distracted, or you feel such like a just emptiness in a not a good way, people feel so empty, that depressed and sadness, that sort of feeling. And again, once more we put an effort to get back to our sensations, and you will be able to feel that the subtlety in our life and the world in general, right? And that'll also give you bigger perspectives to see the world level down than what's visible, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. That's a good point, because what the Buddhi does is it gets you in sync with that subtlety. And we were talking about this a while back, where it's funny that those who have heightened Buddhi or a heightened sort of universal intelligence are more empathetic, are more understanding of other people's situations, because they do see the reality at a deeper level. They have an ability to empathize, and that because that's part of the intelligence as well. It's in sync with the feelings and the emotions. Whereas, as you were saying, like people are desensitized and they're out of touch with that reality. So they don't empathize with others. They just have a look online. Like, we don't have to talk about it, right? It's a look at Twitter. I mean, troll fest, and it's just a mess. You know what I mean? It's a mess. No wonder, people talk about alien lives coming down to Earth, and they say, "Wonder why aliens don't visit Earth." Well, they probably logged on to Twitter. Why would you go? But the thing is that that's what it does, right? It gives you that ability to have a sensibility about things, a sensation and an intuitiveness, and you can't get that from having a mind that's riddled with distractions and all of the conditioning that the world imposes on us. Not to mention diet and bad habits and everything like that, where we're completely desensitized. And so what the Buddhi does is it allows you to see everyone's perspective objectively and know what is the right course going forward. And so we have people in the world like that now, but because people are desensitized, and like what you mentioned with Twitter, because you have trolls on Twitter like that, people aren't listening. They're listening to what they want, but they're not listening to what they need, or they're not listening to the guidance of someone who has a very developed Buddhi, like what you were mentioning with the satsang and stuff like that. You're sitting around because that particular monk has a developed Buddhi, and the ones sitting there probably have a less developed Buddhi, but they can empathize with the situation where you're at. Like, he's talking about lucid dreams and stuff like that, so I'm pretty sure the monk was a bit whatever, but it's but has an ability to empathize with the situation where they are, can see where they are, and know the best course going forward. And that's why we do have teachers in the world, because that's what they're for, right? But in the modern world, we're killing the expert. We're killing the expert, right? And so, because we all know everything. Why do we know everything? Because we have social media. We know everything. Sound bites. Look at YouTube, right? Look at all of the 5-minute Taoism videos you see that are not Taoism. They're wishy-washy. Sound good, yeah. And then next minute, people say, "Oh, that's what Taoism is," and it's like, no, that's not what it is. I mean, it has a relation, but it's not what it is. And that's the world that we are creating. We're creating a soundbite thing where there's actual teachers out there who are guiding the way, telling people, but the people aren't listening. The way people ask you and I privately all the time, how can we talk about this deep knowledge and this and that? Because we listened. We learned. We didn't go in there with our own subjective viewpoint and say, no, but that's not the way it is. How many times have we been overseas, been in monasteries and temples and this and that, particularly Westerners, will go there and start telling Indians or Thais or Nepalis and what have you how life is. And you're like, oh no, like, you don't know how to, you don't know what to do, right? Like, because those people are so humble in that, they just, you know...
Yeah, they're there to listen, and they're just being respectful.
They're respectful to the... But what to say, you know what I mean? So we need to get the cotton wool buds out of our ears and start listening again, and especially listening to people who are teaching that sort of knowledge and who have a developed buddhi. Otherwise, we're going to keep going down, you know, where we're going. So,
yeah, I mean, in Krishnamurti, this is, I think, a transcribed book. Mm-hmm. Book is called On Listening.
Yeah, On Listening, yeah.
Not a big book, but actually, he spoke about on listening. This book lengthy. That's how much he emphasized the importance of listening, and that is also to say how much we are not able to listen properly, right? Yeah. So when he was saying about listening, is that to listen is to for that moment while you're listening to someone, you need to kind of put your own idea aside, put your own beliefs aside, your preconceived idea, prejudice, all these things, all preconceived knowledge aside, and purely listening from that individual's perspective, where that person is coming from, purely listening. So that is how actually difficult it is to practice. Yeah. Whereas nowadays, you listen. While you listen, how can I attack back? This is what you're doing,
the
right?
The debate mind.
Yeah, while you're listening, you're simultaneously thinking how you're gonna...
Listening,
Exactly, that's not listening.
No. But like a lot of us are in that bind, right? Like we're listening through our conditioning. And that's what Krishnamurti points out, and that's the genius of the man. That's why the book, there can be a book-length book on listening. And I know that's a transcription, but that's the genius of the man, right? Like he talk about a developed buddhi, you know what I mean?
His is pretty
up there. And that's why he, like, his torch is like, I don't know, like the sun. Here you go. His torch is like the sun, and you can just see everything. Like, oh man, I didn't even think of that.
Enlightens the universe.
Well, I remember when I read Total Freedom when I was young, and just like mine just exploded. Like, oh my god, like, how did I not think about this when I was younger? Like, it just, it's just unbelievable. But anyway, that's when we talk about listening. That's one of the points, right? We're listening through our conditioning, and which shows the level of our intelligence. And I think it was either Epictetus or maybe Diogenes who said this. I can't remember who said it, but they said any information you get, no matter whether you agree or not, is still a learning. It's still a learning. There's something you can learn from it, because you're learning essentially about humanity itself. Like, you're not looking at humanity as separate parts. You're learning about humanity in some sense, as a single organism itself. And so, and I know that those two gentlemen as well had a very developed buddhi, but that raises a good point, right? Because if you can, especially if you do, and that's like what we were talking about with emotions and feelings before of someone with a developed buddhi, is because they can see objectively. Their view is not caught in their own mind, because that sort of part of the mind is already sort of subsided, like the subjective perspective of, like for Jiddu, for example, like the subjective, even when he had satsang, I mean, he would say the speaker, and like, because he knew in some sense that he's a conduit for knowledge, but it's not Jiddu Krishnamurti that's...
as a person,
as a person performing this utility for other people, it's a speaker, facilitating this satsang, but we're part of something much greater than the speaker and people listening. And
he didn't consider himself as a master or a teacher.
no, of course not.
Yeah, he just wanted to call himself a speaker, and everyone else is listening, but they're all part of the whole event, and he's not any above or better or anything like that.
No.
That
Well,
was,
a good part of total freedom, I mean, you read the translation also in Korean, is that a good part of that is actually just him in daily life contemplating. Like when he was in Varanasi, like walking down the Ganga. Oh, the sun's a particular way today. But the way that explains it is like you're getting into that deeper understanding of reality itself, you know what I mean? The subtlety of reality that we often don't see. We were talking about this the other night when we were walking home and we saw the full moon, and about how, especially in cities, how a lot of people don't notice the background. You know, there's only the foreground, and usually the foreground is all their dramas in their mind, but then in the background, the full moon's up.
Yeah.
Sun's going to rise in the morning. What a wonderful thing. And that's what Judy was kind of talking a lot about in Total Freedom and other books as well, where, you know, we our mind gets too caught in these details of our personal life, which is only a temporary phenomenon. You know, the sun and the earth and the moon, and they're going to be around a whole lot longer than what your temporary existence is going to be around. And so that's the thing, like when you tap into that subtlety, you can empathize with other people, you can then lead the way, so to speak, even though you didn't intend to lead the way. You know, a lot of people ask me, how did I get into this thing? It just sort of happened. It's not like it was an intention, right, of me doing the books and stuff like that, as you know, because you've been with me the whole way. So it's just a focus on the spiritual path, which then develops the Buddhi as sort of just a byproduct. You know, like a lot of people say, like if they look at someone like Swami Vivekananda or Swami Sarvapriyananda or someone like this, how come they can, like, their intellect is like, and it's like, well, they've devoted their whole life to this. The development of the Buddhi is just a byproduct of the spiritual path, of their study, of their meditation, of their sincerity towards spirituality, not flimsiness. You know, and sincerity is a big thing in the world, right? Are you sincere about this path or not? Well, it makes me feel good. And it's like, well, this is not feel good sort of stuff. It's a lot deeper than that. So.
Yeah. I mean, something similar to that. You mentioned about that lecture or talk these people gave. The speakers were Jonathan Haidt and Joseph Henrik.
Yep.
Those two, and maybe some other people were in the place as well. But so after the talk, and there is some audience there, and some people stand up and ask some questions, and there is this one particular individual. It sounded like he or she was basically having a go at both of them. Yeah, right. In that situation, like, I mean, you get triggered, right? Anyone would get triggered. But as you point that out, because they are very highly intellectual and their life dedicated in study, and they themselves are scholars, so that their emotional center is very well balanced as well.
Yes.
So that their reaction wasn't anything emotional or to attack back to that individual or anything like that, but they had a more so of an emotional sympathy toward that individual, and tried to explain with what they know, but with more sympathy. Yeah. And again, that's another thing that I think that's also a byproduct as well from cultivating Buddhi, is that more we get to become intelligent and also know all more knowledge and cultivate wisdom, we also get to have healthy emotional center as well, and that you could say intuition or whatever, but also like as a human being, we all have emotions, but we are able to control that emotion at times when needed to be, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing we need to think about. Again, that is to prove that how much of a general public's emotional center is out of whack.
Out of whack, yeah.
Like people are very reactive and progressive or liberal, whatever.
Angry.
They're angry. They're emotionally very invested, and their anger and their reaction in general is just so like too much.
Too much, yeah.
It's not intelligent. It's not well thought out. It's all emotional.
Yeah. Well, it's like what you said, that their emotional center is mud, like in general, right? Like because they're reactive. There's no the Buddhi's not developed, so to have the intellect to discern, like, because when you look at your emotions, right? Emotions are beautiful, but emotions are like anything. Like it's a double-edged sword. So there are insignificant emotions, there are destructive emotions, there are emotions that are beautiful, and then like express, the love and the compassion and empathy of the world. But in that description you were talking about with Haidt and Henrik, that they, maybe inside them, right, when that individual, it was a lady, when she said what she said, then maybe something came up. But because of the developed Buddhi, they know that that's not the best course of action going forward. First of all, they can empathize with her because, let's be frank, she's not at their level because of her reaction towards the lecture. And it was kind of funny because Haidt, he didn't really say anything. He just remained quiet. And Henrik's response was kind of like, it was like a grandfather talking to a young child. It really was. It was really like empathetic, and like he could see it their way, but kind of said, but you have to also, think about, it offered a little bit of guidance. Where her reaction was very judgmental because they're both Americans. She kind of said they have to get out more, and so she was kind of like attacking their personality and personal character, which is very, especially when you're talking about a lecturer at that degree, and they were talking to apparently people who are academics, but they seemed like they were way beneath them. Then sometimes the best course of action is what Haidt did, was just remain quiet in this. If that's what you think of us, and that's okay. Because it is okay. Because you can see where they're coming from. Like, we get this on the channel all the time, right? Like, someone attacked you on the comment section for whatever reason. Usually I cop the brunt of it, but they attack you. But then you just have to remain like, whatever. Like, you don't know this person. You have to understand, there has to be probably a lot of things in their life that is
not very good.
Not very good. We don't know them personally. Or it could just be a bot. It could just be not even a person. It could just be someone on a troll farm. There's a lot of things to consider. So you don't take it too seriously, So if you have a developed Buddhi, you just look at it and you just go, well, that's how she sees it. Like, that's what those two would have said. And she completely missed the point of the lectures, but not everyone's going to get it, right? And we get that a lot on the channel, right? Like, especially like not just with the podcast, but with my single videos and stuff like that, where people will say, oh, but what about this and this and that? And they had not listened. They had not listened to what was necessary and what I was actually explaining in the thing. They're talking through their conditioning and not listening to the knowledge.
Right.
And so I always tell them, I just teach the authentic knowledge. I try not to put any of my own sass on top and a little bit of hot sauce on there. I don't try to do that. I try to give the straight dope, because that's how I learned. I learned with no filters, and that's how I got the knowledge. And the same, and likewise with yourself, because I don't know, maybe that's just a personal thing for both you and I, but a lot of people will go to certain places. You mentioned Tamwa, right? Like when we returned Tamwa, people are there, and a lot of that stuff that you had years ago had disappeared.
Yeah.
Because too many foreigners were going there at the time. When you were going there, it was very small.
It's very unknown back then.
But then when we ended up going back, it was polluted with foreigners hanging out and like not really respecting what a monastery is for, right? And so it can be problematic that way. There has to be in some sense, some strict guidelines that has to come back into place. I don't know what's going on there now, but anyway. But that's the thing, see, when you have that, it's interesting because when you said they have Heid and Henrik have a clean emotional center, a centered emotional center, because it's interesting when you have that developed buddhi, your emotional center is, it's not wound up with conditioning and it's not reactive. It's not reactive. It's not like getting agitated about this news article or that news article, and it's not engaged in debate and all of these things.
I think also you can say a little bit like this too: the hot cognition and cold cognition. I mean, both cognition we have because they have different functions and they both are equally important, right? But again, in that situation, hot cognitive reaction would be like getting triggered and getting angry and like being aggressive, right? But then you have well-developed cold cognition to tame that down. Then you'll have a healthy emotional state that hot cognition can just stay calm and be tamed down a little bit, right? Yeah. That is to have again, educated cold cognitive functions.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a strong cold cognitive function. Yeah. Like I mentioned in emotional intuition with peak performers, talk about those who have a weaker cold cognition as opposed to those who have a strong cold cognition. So, and having a strong cold cognition can be problematic because it can develop too much of a personality. But at the same time, if you understand a lot more, it's very beneficial because then you can be aware of certain emotions that are not beneficial or significant actually for certain situations. Because what we're seeing in the world today is people just tapping into the hot cognition with no cold cognitive interference to say, well, wait up, is this emotion pure? Am I just a reactive and aggressive because it conflicts with my way of seeing the world? And so when we're on the Eastern spiritual path, we're trying to get out of our subjective way of seeing the world, right? We're trying to see the world as it is without filters and so forth and so on. And so if you are on that path, you're not interested in protests, you're not interested in politics, you're not interested in any of that. Because the idea of saving the world and so forth and so on is a Western idea, not an Eastern idea. That's the Mata idea in Christianity and those sorts of Western spiritual paths. So, and we get this a lot on the channel, right? A lot of people say, "Oh, what do Taoists say about saving the world and this and that?" It's like, man, you do not understand what Taoism is about.
It's not Taoist.
That's not Taoist. If you said that to Lao Tzu, he had a heart attack. He's like, oh my God, I'm out, I'm tapped. Life's finished for me.
You walk the other way.
So. But that's why it's so important to develop that buddhi. So we can then see the nature of reality, right? Instead of being caught up in our emotions and caught up with the worldly dramas. You've said, enough of that crap.
Yeah.
I've invested my whole life into that. And where did it get me? I'm still in the same place I am, psychologically.
Yeah.
So I look at my dad, right? My dad was so, not invested, but annoyed with situations in the world and this and that. And he had always been and never had the taste of the ananda, the bliss. Maybe he did having kids and stuff like that, but ananda's a different thing, right? It's a completely different thing. It's not an associated bliss.
That's right.
It's unassociated. And so a lot of people will invest their entire life into politics, into proving people wrong based on your own subjective viewpoint. But all you are is a localization of the one consciousness. And you have to realize that. And the way to realize that is to develop the buddhi. And then you won't be emotionally reactive. You won't try to influence the world with your opinion, your own agenda.
We have more than enough of those people out there, right?
Oh my God.
We don't want to be one of them.
Exactly. Well, for those few people who are on my channel, that we have to really dedicate our life to this, because the thing is that if you even if you, I mean, if you remotely care for the human species, then what we do here now is what influences the world later on a subtle level. We're not going out trying to influence the world, but the way that you are and the way that you live and your conviction to the spiritual path is what influences future generations. But if you're going to go out and you're going to be caught in the drama and this and that, we've got plenty of people doing that. And there's going to be plenty of other people being influenced by that. Look at what social media has become. Social media has become a place for drama and a place for like venting anger. That's why the most popular things on YouTube are drama, are controversial topics. And the least popular things on YouTube is, well, what we're talking about here.
Yeah, proof is in the pudding.
Proof is in the pudding. But if you're one of the lucky ones that, you know, not one of the lucky ones, but if you're one of the people who get to share this space with you and I, then we appreciate that you're here, and that says a lot about you as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and that's the thing about the Buddhi. See, the thing about the Buddhi is that when you value that, then ideas of valuing being somebody and having money and that becomes background noise. The Buddhi is background noise for the general populace, but for those on the real spiritual path, the authentic spiritual path, wealth and status and that becomes the background noise.
Yeah. Again, what I love about the journey of studying and reading and things like that is keeps your curiosity and wandering mind always alive.
Yeah.
And whatever you get from along the journey is just a byproduct. First and foremost, I think it's the most joyful thing for anyone to be experienced, I think. Just fulfilling your intellectual curiosity. And just the wonder about things in general. And those wonder that we all have is only can come from someone else, the greater people's minds, someone who were more knowledgeable, wiser than all of us. And they all left in words behind them for next generation, for us.
Of course.
So that, the journey itself is very enjoyable, and everything else that comes with it is just a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we show, like, you know, like when we go to, you know, when people say, oh, do people pray to the Buddha or the Swami Vivekananda or someone like this, and it's like, no, what people are doing is they're paying respect.
Yes.
Because they set them on the path.
Yes.
And so when you not worship, but when you you're paying respect to those who had a more developed Buddhi, who are now guiding you in the right direction, so to speak.
And we just showing our gratitude.
Yeah, of course.
For genuine gratitude. And,
of course.
Respect and
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do on here, right? So we pay respect, genuine respect to all those with those developed Buddhi before us. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you guys got a lot out of that, and we'll see you guys next time.